I'm just.
Right now, it's not full screen.
All right. Okay. So,
Right
all
now, it's
right.
full.
So I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today or tonight. I'm in Paris, and I thank you all for coming to my presentation at this late hour or early hour, depends on where you are. And I also would like to thank the host and Kim, who presented a very really interesting and wonderful presentation, very impressive work. I'm afraid I will have to take you to a slightly different topic now, closely related, still in the field of education. So just a quick reminder, my name is Yasser Kosbar. I'm a consultant. I'm based in Paris, and I was working as a consultant for the UNESCO and other international organizations. My area of expertise is financing digital learning. I recently co-authored a report a background paper that was published as a part of the UNESCO GIM report that was recently published this year on the use of digital technology in education. I am also a teacher. I taught at the University of Sorbonne Nouvelle here in Paris, and before that, I was teaching at the University of Sussex, where I completed my PhD. And I'm saying that because wearing two hats simultaneously pretty much shaped my positionality, and it really enriched my outlook on the topic that we will be discussing today on how we can aim towards a human-centered and ecological and inclusive use and governance of AI in higher education. So the use of AI in education, including higher education, is actually not a new phenomenon. It has been around for close to 30 years now. I know this may come as a surprise or perhaps a shock, considering the recent buzz that was, that is still going on right now. But also to remind everybody that the conversation on the use and governance of AI in education is not new. It's been going on for a while now, especially among those who are in the field. However, just in case, people were, for those who may not be familiar with the term of AI, I just would like you to kind of start with Oh, I see that a good place to start the conversation is a kind of a definition of what AI, or the definition that I will be relying on going forward with the presentation of AI. So AI is defined as a computing systems that are able to engage in human-like processes, such as learning, adapting, synthesizing, self-correction, and use of data for complex processing tasks. So there are many studies, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, it's been 3 decades now on the field that have attempted actually to identify or to pin down what AI means in education. They have done so according to relational epistemology. There is indeed a rich literature in the topic, and they offer kind of a myriad definitions of AI in education. And there's also emerging literature on the topic that pretty much also uh, uh, correspond to the recent development, especially with the introduction of generative AI tools. Nevertheless, it is also important and equally crucial to underscore that the definition of AI or AI in general is still a black box. That means there is a huge room for development, and that means in the definition and the governance and also the limitation. There's a lot of things that we still do not know and do not understand, and it's really good for also everybody to bear that in mind as we move forward when we discuss about the use and implementation of AI tools in education. Um, so the use and application of AI in higher education is kind of is premised on in many things, and even though higher education institutions are usually known to be slow adopters of new technology, the application of AI in teaching and learning starting to pick up pace recently. So the application of AI in higher education increased basically simply based on the premise that it will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of higher education. I identified three main areas. Of course, the literature is full of different areas on that. So the what we are told is basically that AI can help with the teaching and learning processes in introducing intelligent tutoring systems, chatbots, and predictive analysis. Some institutions were quick actually to introduce and adopt these technologies. I'm sure that we have all seen these, little icons on in many of our universities' website that popped up all of the sudden, on the right-hand screen that just below that say, what can I help you? It's kind of a remote, a robot, with glasses or whatever. Um, and they have been, kind of introduced. These are what we call the chatbots. And I mean, despite the investment that have been made, these chatbots have not really been kind of fully utilized until just a few months back. But I will get to that point later on. So the appeal for artificial intelligence or AI in higher education is basically that it will increase or advance the services and the governance and decision making. We have seen that the issues like for instance knowledge management system, campus management system, etc. that AI can actually help in terms of running administrative systems, and can automate routine tasks such as admissions and enrollment, uh, um, files for financial aid, etc., etc. These all this kind of a repetitive routine like task that AI tools premised to help with or make it more efficient and cost effective. There's also the issue of quality assurance, especially for universities where there is, like for instance, in the UK, where they have a research excellence framework and teaching excellence framework that, the adoption of AI can help actually in enhancing the quality of the curriculum design and delivery. Also, um, equipping graduates, with the certain tools and skills to meet the changing nature of the labor market. Um, so just to also to highlight one important thing, I'm aware that higher education institutions are, differ globally. There is not a kind of a unified or homogeneous um, um, system or topography, but I tend to kind of lean more towards a simplified categorization of higher education institutions going forward, and that would be between research-intensive universities, teaching-intensive universities, and hybrid universities. For teaching and intensive universities, we saw that the application of AI actually kind of providing or giving some positive results. For instance, there was a study from India that show that in terms of elevating the workload on teachers due to the massification of higher education, AI were actually effective tools that help teacher meeting the demanding workload, but also helping with the student engagement with the class, with the curriculum and in the classroom. So with the fast adoption and application of AI, we see that higher education institutions are actually constantly pressured to evolve digitally to meet the shifting global needs. The advancement of emerging computer technologies, such as quantum computing, wearable devices, robot control, and sensing devices, as well as the increasing reliance on mobile learning and 5G wireless communication technologies, has provided kind of new opportunities and challenges for higher education institutions and universities. So we see that with the rise of digital technology and what we call the smart campuses, some authors actually have gone as far as to say that the university as we know it today is going to die. A bit dramatic, if you ask me, but there is kind of that we are now seeing the chaos that precedes any a change. And I think that was kind of a very adequate quote or a view in terms of what is happening at the moment. We see that despite the excitement, as I discussed in the previous slide, we see that educators, teachers, and administrators are still confused of how actually to use digital technology in general, and in particular AI tools, that in terms of administration, but also pedagogically, on how to scale it up and use it in a broader scale, and how it may actually have a big impact in teaching and learning and higher education. So why are we discussing all of a sudden, or why did the AI just in a few months kind of, been on the news, all over the news, of course. So this is, the photo is telling. So with the emergence, of ChatGPT in November 2023, it take the world of education in general by storm. you know so in terms of the digital technology, I also believe that before that, the COVID and the closure of a school have also kind of renewed the interest of how we can expand on the use of digital technology. However, that now feels like a dress rehearsal, to be honest, for what came next. So one particular aspect about the use of generative AI tools with accessibility. So that's why it was very, very appealing to use ChatGPT, because there is no training required to use it. It's not complicated. There is no fees. You just need an email address and you're ready to go. So you don't need an infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. Even though ChatGPT, in its essence, is kind of a glorified version of the chatbots that were kind of introduced early on. So the reaction to the use of generative AI tools were quite mixed, and actually the ChatGPT kind of a sort of a kind of seismic change in terms of the conversation of how can we harness the use of generative AI tools in the education process. So, such as with any technology, I mean, some have voiced, excitement and embracement and encouragement of using this new technology and building on it. Most of these people were actually also from, the tech companies. Others, especially practitioners like myself, have expressed concerns, especially as it relates to the speed with which some institutions were quick to take a position toward the use and adoption of generative AI tools. So just to start with some good news about the use of generative AI tools, we see that limited evidence, but existing and emerging evidence are suggesting that the generative AI tools can help with increasing student engagement. They can offer some sort of benefits of tailoring the learning process to make it more personalized and individual, personalized to meet the individual needs of students. We also see that there is kind of a potential of helping students who may find difficulties in learning complicated or complex concepts, while at the same time decreasing the teaching workload, thereby kind of like, providing higher education institutions or universities or kind of an optimum solution to solve an equation that has been for a very long time really hard to solve. The second thing, as I mentioned, is accessibility. It doesn't really require any, it basically for free, but also not all of them. I mean, some require kind of a minimum fees, but also it's about, the training. You just, simply need to, provide an input, but it doesn't really require kind of a heavy training. It's not a kind of a high tier technology skills. The third thing will be, of course, collaboration, that it may increase collaboration, especially also for those who are familiar with higher education institution and the tendencies to work in silos. Uh, there is a kind of a perceived premise that it may help with, interdisciplinary collaboration. And the last thing will be efficiency. As I said earlier, these are cost effective, but also the speed at which they can, help, expedite the learning process, the learning and teaching process, especially for teachers in the preparation of courses, in the delivery of courses, etc., etc. So the excitement, however, started to fizzle quickly with the rapid advancement of generative AI, and it was replaced with anxiety, or in some contexts, I might say panic, as the limitation of AI tools. We have seen studies coming from, for instance, the US, where generative AI tools like ChatGPT were able to excel in a standardized exam, such as the test of understanding in college economics, but also in STEM topics. Like there was a study from Australia that where also ChatGPT were able to pass an engineering exam, which puts a huge pressure, of course, on higher education institutions to kind of respond to this, but also to policymakers in order to take into account of how far, or the limitation of generative AI tools. So higher education, institutions started to ringing the alarm about, the some of the setbacks of generative AI tools. So we started to see, there is questions about, errors in fabrication, what, um, um, data scientists and engineers call it hallucinations. There's also the issue about control. Most of, generative AI tools are developed in the global north, mostly Silicon Valley. So higher education institutions are basically, or most of it around the world, do not have any control on the development and the governance of these tools. Plagiarism, and I think we all heard enough about that topic, because that was the main topic, but also the question is also about copyrights and the integrity of research. And the last thing is about bias, because ChatGPT selects certain resources, which for those who are involved in a movement like decolonizing the curriculum, here bias can actually be kind of a reversal to that movement for decades, because basically it will choose the most cited resources, and obviously these resources are, divorced from the context, but also based on a certain, algorithm. And we have all seen, studies that, support or shows that the racial and sexist biases that ChatGPT responses have shown in the past. So that prompted kind of a need for an ethical framework from across the globe. However, the reaction from countries is quite really interesting to say, because while, we highlighted all these, setbacks and problems and challenges, we see that, some countries actually are starting to pledge huge investment in generative AI tools, which is quite, interesting. Countries like, France, Germany, and the UK, they started to pledge millions and millions in tech startups that will kind of designing AI tools. Some other countries started to either ban the use of generative AI tools in higher education or in education in general, or update the AI policies in order to address the new technologies. Uh, some others, they did not have any policy at all. They still, in a bit of a loss in terms of, the use of generative AI tools in education, and that also speaks about, the digital gap and the digital disparity across different contexts. However, in total, there has been kind of a stressing need for global governance of AI to fill the gap of what governments are not capable for the moment, or some governments are not capable of addressing for the moment. So the global governance of AI by institutions, for instance, like UNESCO, so there is kind of a history. This is also not a new phenomena. There is kind of a history and publications that these organizations um, have published in the past. So, for instance, UNESCO have published recently a report that is called the Guidance for Generative AI in Education Research. That was just recently in September. There was also a specific one for higher education on harnessing the era of artificial intelligence and higher education, which I will not go into it in details because for the sake of time, but they are all available and accessible for free for everybody to have a look. However, some of the critiques that was kind of uh, a raised on the role of international organizations on the global governance of AI is basically the first is the democracy on how decisions are being made inside these organizations and who has the upper hand in terms of the difference. These are the kind of a soft power. The second thing is the collaboration. It's not only UNESCO that is publishing that, but also there are other organizations like the OECD, the Global Center for AI, the European Commission. While that may seem like they are enriching the field, it's also there's a lot of overlapping, which can be also overcome with collaboration or better collaboration between the organization. And the third thing is the implementation on the ground. When you're having a top-down approach, there is also kind of a limitation of how much that will be implemented on the ground. That takes me to what has been constantly stressed on in these guidances, and it's why do we have a human-centered approach, or why do we need to at the core of all these guidances, of course, there has been kind of the human need to be in the loop. It will also seem that it will develop kind of a better engagement and trust between administrator, teachers, and students and different stakeholders. And the last thing would be also about fairness and responsibility, that we need to kind of hold or be held accountable of the integrity of our research and our teaching practices. So the challenges for higher education now, as I mentioned earlier, first is the digital disparity. And the digital disparity is not just in terms of investments, but also in terms of regulations. I don't know, for those who, for instance, based in Europe, there is still also, or some other parts of the world, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will have access to many AI tools to try them and test them. That may put other or that may put institutions in a disadvantage, especially in this competitive global knowledge economy. The second thing is evidence, which is quite interesting that even despite the whole rave and the excitement around generative AI, we don't have enough evidence actually to support positive impacts or dividends on the use of generative AI tools. Most of the studies that I have looked into, they were they were clear to mention that this is a small scale study, and there is still a need for larger scale studies in order to adequately assess the benefits of a generative AI tool. The third thing is data culture inside higher education institute, and that's also another important factor. Most of institutes rely on global frameworks, like for instance, in Europe, you have the GDPR. However, with the lack or with the absence of such policies, there isn't really any kind of a data culture. And I'm not just talking here about literacy, but also I'm talking about, data protection, privacy, etc., etc. All these things are very important to take into account and to develop, a digital ecosystem where there is a data culture. The last thing for the challenge is also engagement with different stakeholders. I couldn't stress enough about, the kind of the challenge that we have working on silos and not really in kind of a collaboration with other actors in the field. And I think that's something that need to be worked on and improved from universities, colleges, etc., to be more engaged with the society where they actually, or the communities where they operate. So to conclude quickly, so basically for a roadmap, I'm suggesting three main things. First is a paradigm shift. So the paradigm shift from, for us as universities, basically to go back and see our vision and mission. Are we aiming to just have graduates with degrees, are we working on having the next generation of critical thinkers? And I think that can I think the introduction of generative AI brought that into sharp focus now, because, you can use generative AI in a lot of other things, not just, to write for you an essay. You can use it for brainstorming, training, etc., etc. So I think that also very important to remind students of why they are here and to remind ourselves as an institution of why we are doing this. Regulations, of course, we need to take into consideration several factors, ecological inclusion. However, we also don't need to over-regulate because, as I mentioned earlier, that may lead to a disadvantage that you will not have access to technology, and that may put you in a disadvantage in the global economy. The last thing is empowering teachers and students, and I'm talking here about meaningful engagement with teacher and students union. Unfortunately, we do not hear enough from the perspective of teachers and students on, the psychological, but also the how the emotional and the anxieties of using these tools, and what does that mean. So our conversation should actually exceed the monetized value of how much it costs, but actually not just in terms of money, but also in terms of human resources, etc. And by that, I thank you very much. And I've reached the last of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Yasser. So interesting presentation. You are exactly, your topic is in the pearl right now in the university. When we teaching at the university, always talk about your topic. Thank you very much. So interesting.